Hey everyone, so a few months ago, one of the Brawlhalla developers, Duke, who you may know from the dev streams or tournament commentary, reached out to me asking if I'd like to be interviewed. He and Winan, who are both Asian Americans, were curious about my experience as an Asian American in a younger generation as well as within the Brawlhalla community. This is a lot different from the stuff I normally do, so I was a little bit out of my element, but I think it went pretty well. So yeah, hope you enjoy the conversation, grab a cup of tea, a cup of joe. There'll be gameplay running in the background for the whole vid to keep your eyes stimulated if you wish. And yeah, that's it. I'll catch you in the next one.
I'll start with an easy one that I think happens to a lot of us is do you get questioned about your ethnicity, which is like generally for me comes across as a question of like, what kind of Asian are you?
Yeah, it really depends on how people ask it. If we're like casual and like I know you and you're asking like, hey, what Asian are you? Like I'm like okay with that. But if it's like a stranger just ask us what Asians are we, or like where do you come from? And I'm like, what do you mean where do I come from? I'm born in Texas. Like, you know, like what do you mean? It's just an awkward question sometimes, but we do get it often. Sometimes I'll try guessing. And it's like, just
that's always worse.
Stop. Or like after you tell them, like, okay, so what Asian are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm Vietnamese American. And they'll like, oh, you look so Chinese though. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Those social interactions have occurred, at least for me, and actually both of us, since we've been together for so long. They occur all the time. And for the most part, I don't think people mean any malintent with it.
Yeah.
It's just so awkward.
It doesn't offend me, but it's definitely like awkward. I want to know how you experience it, because I mean, you're much younger than me and in a different space.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is a little bit different because I'm also mixed. I do want to touch upon when I made a great point about how like when it's a friend asking, it's really different. Because often when it's the first interaction people have, it's like, wow, really, like that's the deepest thing you can think of to get to know me. When it's a friend, it's just like, oh, they're likely asking just to get to know a little bit more about someone that they're familiar or comfortable with. But when it starts being like the first interaction is, where are you from? Like, what type of Asian are you? That's often like the unsaid thing there is the implication of like, oh, I'm gonna think of you a different way because of where you're from. Like, oh, what kind of immigrant are you? Oh, are you American? That's kind of the underlying message there. But for me, I have light skin. I think most people when they see me, they presume I'm mixed versus being like a full Asian. The question I get is like, what's your half? Less so than what are you? And I think it's a little bit similar in that regard, but I think there's a little bit less aggressiveness behind it a lot of the time. I think when I get asked that question, people assume I'm American. I think when a lot of people get asked that question, the assumption is that they're not American. And I think that's the big difference with someone who's mixed and presents as lighter skin.
It's just an awkward interaction when the immediate thought is, I'm not from America.
Yeah.
There's almost like an entitlement to what being an American means when that question is asked a lot of the time. It's like, how much are you deserving of the title of American?
I think alongside that, there's two things that I usually hear. One is like, oh, you know, you don't have much of an accent. No. And then the other side of that is the, oh, you're Vietnamese? I love pho. That's what they associate you and your culture with. And I'm curious, do you get that? Oh, you're half Korean? I love half of a bulgogi.
Yeah, you know that meme like, how do you do fellow kids? With Steve Buscemi? It's like that, but with cultures. People are like, oh yeah, they grapple onto like the one thing they know, and then like they try to fit in and like be cool with you by saying that, but it's like, why are you walking up to someone you've never met before and go, hey, I love bulgogi? It's like, well, cool, man. Good to know. I don't even know your name yet, but cool. You feel like you're being treated like an object often, and you're talking to an NPC, and you're just picking the right dialogue option.
It's super awkward because like I'm sure most of these people who have these interactions with us, they don't mean anything harmful by it. It's almost like
it's usually curiosity more than anything else.
Yeah.
Obvious innocent question, and it's like I understand that, but like part of me can't help but feel like that tinge of like
I think it's because it comes with a sense of like, kind of again to that whole point of Americanness, is it comes with a sense of like otherness, right? That like sense of like, you're some indescribable thing, this mysterious non-American thing, and I want to know which specific thing that is. But I do want to move on a little bit before we just keep lingering on people asking us awkward questions. My second question, and this is kind of one that I think is more interesting to me because of just like the generational gap between us. How important is that Asian identity to you? Again, also because you're half, it might not like weigh as much on you. Whereas like, I think for me personally, it's a big identifier, right? Like I used to be called designated Asian because I was the only Asian in my friend group, in my spaces that I went to.
For me, I feel like it's pretty important. I grew up having a lot of Asian American friends or Asian friends, and it was just something that we really like to celebrate, whether we're Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, what have you. It was just fun being able to celebrate all these different cultures and then mix them together, and then just have someone understand like your upbringings too. It's I feel like a big identifier for me. I'm happy and proud to be Vietnamese American. You know, if the world wasn't a better place, I would have been enjoying like dragon dances and lion dances and having food cakes. Like all that really resonates with me, but that's because it's something I grew up with. I grew up in a very like, I guess, encouraging and warm Asian American culture amongst my friends and family.
Yeah, you had a lot more Asian friends than I did.
Well, it sounds like there's a level of not having to explain yourself that's really comforting that I hear in that story. For me, I think being mixed comes with its own set of different challenges, I think. One of them being almost a desire to over-explain myself. And so in a scenario where, let's say there were a lot of Asian Americans, I would feel the compulsion to prove myself for being Asian enough. I think that often happens also a lot with second-generation immigrants, where they feel a disconnect to a culture that's really seemingly defining them, but there's almost a level of like conflict there where they don't really feel super tied to it, even though they're supposed to, quote unquote. I feel that a lot where I grew up with a lot of Korean cultural values and traditions and stuff, and I almost feel the need to perform that in front of other people so that I can claim that I am Asian enough. And so like that's a big conflict that I have, because I almost feel like I'm always judged one way or another. Because on the one hand, I'm judged like minorities often are about, oh, this thing that you're doing is weird. And then I also feel judged on the other end where, oh, you're weird because you're not doing it correctly. You're not holding your chopsticks correctly. You can't speak correctly. And so there's this battle that you can never really win, because on both sides, you're not enough for anyone.
So my next question, who are some like major cultural Asian people that you identify with? I phrased this awkwardly, but kind of where my head was at when I wrote this down was like, growing up for Winan and I, the people we had in the media that we looked at was like, we had Jackie Chan, we had Jet Li, Bruce Lee, and Lucy Liu, and that was about it. There wasn't a lot in terms of like Asian representation. Yeah, Yellow Power Ranger, you know, it really, there wasn't a lot. And as I've gotten older, I've seen, you know, like there's a lot more media where there's a lot more Asian representation. Like what are some things that you look at?
Of all kinds too, not just like martial artists.
That's true, that's true. We're not just a bunch of people who know martial arts.
I would say growing up, I may have a little bit of a different experience because I watched a lot of Korean dramas growing up. So when people ask like, oh, what's your favorite Disney movie? I haven't seen any of them, but I can tell you what, you know, Jumong was. So I did have in that sense a big connection to Korean media. And then there's also like the spike of K-pop and stuff like that. So it's always kind of looming, but at the same time, it always felt other. It's kind of the similar thing where, yeah, I can maybe connect to 80%. I'm like almost there, but I still don't feel like I'm super, you know, it's not really me. And so like the one person I can really look at and be like, oh, that's kind of cool is Keanu Reeves. He's also mixed, he's part Chinese, and he's not the nerd, he's not the dweeb, one of those guys. I mean, he is martial arts technically, but you know. He's John Wick, he's Neo, like he's cool. And so like that's one of the people that I really liked him because it wasn't that his mixedness or his Asianness was his character. He was just Keanu being a terrible actor, but also being badass. And I felt like, okay, that's cool. Otherwise, I would say Ryan Higa on YouTube is the biggest one. He was the very first channel I subscribed to. I didn't know subscriptions existed until I watched his channel and then I subscribed. And he was massive. Like without Ryan Higa, I don't think I would feel nearly as comfortable being Asian American.
It's so interesting to hear you say that because at a point in time, Duke and I were really into Ryan Higa too. And like Kev Jumba, I like had friends who knew Kev Jumba and like...
Yeah, they'd be like, we saw him at our school because Kev Jumba was in Texas as well and stuff like that, so...
Yeah. Besides that, it's just like, it was always different I guess depending on like what stage of life I was in, like when I was super young and growing up, of course, all I really had was like, yeah, the original yellow Power Ranger and, Jackie Chan or something. And it was like that for a long time. And it was really weird for like people to like also expect me to know like martial arts in school and stuff. Like that was a weird time growing up. But when YouTube started coming around and like, all this other stuff, social media, and I still love her to this day, is Michelle Phan, one of like the top makeup artists and stuff. And that was fun to have as like someone to like be influenced by, or like, yeah, Kev Jemba, right? Or Wong Fu Productions.
Yeah.
I was like in love with them and like got to meet them in person one time in college. And it was nice that once like YouTube and all that stuff came out, there was more to look up to than just your typical what you see stereotypically shown in like movies and stuff, because not every Asian or Asian American is going to be a martial artist, right? There's more to us.
Early YouTube really, and I think this is less the case nowadays, which is a bit unfortunate, but it's just the nature of the platform. But early YouTube, I think, was the golden era of ordinary people being able to share their ordinary lives with the masses. I remember in elementary school, there was one other Asian American in my grade, and we knew like all the words to Big Bouncy Inflatable Green Ball, and nobody in our grade knew what we were talking about, and we just like spit off Ryan Higa lines constantly. But it's interesting that you mentioned like martial arts too, because that's also the same for me. I grew up watching a lot of Jackie Chan movies, Jet Li and all the big boys. Not really Bruce Lee as much, but yeah.
So I want to back up a little bit to an earlier response you had, and I think this is something again that I think when Anne shares with me is like when we see an Asian person succeeding and doing well, like we feel a connection to that person and we are excited for that person. But just kind of based on how you were responding earlier, do you feel that same connection, or is it more like you see someone who is mixed and that's what you're more excited about, is someone who's like shares your kind of otherness?
I'd say 50-50. I think a part of me is really excited. On the other hand, I never have actually felt it. I have a super weird mix, and I've never seen it in media. So it's hard to say. I feel like when I experience that, I'll know, but I don't really know what that feels like yet.
So now we're going to pivot a little bit in terms of questions. Something a little bit more close to home, potentially, and I guess more recent news, right, is the
unnamed virus, please don't flag,
is kind of taken over the world, and alongside of it has come a lot of anti-Asian American sentiments. Of course, there's stories in the news of Asian Americans getting attacked and persecuted. There was a Vietnamese family that got
poked with something sharp
in Texas because somebody was upset about the quote-unquote China virus. And I was just curious about what are your thoughts on that? What are your experiences with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's anything new. I think it's just
Corvad 910
is the fire beneath the boiling pot that was already there. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that this is a new thing that we can nip it in the bud, but it just feels like more of the same. Like when I read it, it's just, yeah, that makes sense. And I wish I didn't think, yeah, that makes sense. But anytime any of this news comes out, it's just so like, yeah.
Yeah. It really sucked to have all these awful things happen. I know from my personal experience, like even being on the dev stream was difficult because we had some really awful people, and it's just like I had to like try to ignore that. It sucks to think, yeah, that's nothing new. That's been going on. It's just unfortunately
Corvad 910
push it over for some people to feel like they have the right to just be awful.
You know, oftentimes a lot of anti-Asian discrimination gets swept under the rug because of model minority myths and everything like that. And so when something negative happens towards an Asian American, there's often almost, I mean, this happens with anything, but a victim blaming about, oh, it's not that bad. It's worse for other people and stuff like that. But when there's such a huge excuse and justification, like you were saying, it's like all that gets brought to light. And it's very clear that it's coming from the same places. It's just, you know, now they have an excuse.
There are times where like you and I are, let's say, going to pick up groceries. I'm really concerned about how I look, making sure I wear a mask, and just making sure I don't look like something that will give an excuse for someone to be awful towards me and Duke and our family, you know, like when we're just trying to go grocery shopping. I mean, like really awful.
Yeah.
close to death threats. And it's like, you don't even know who I am. It's just because of I look this way.
Yeah, it's been fuel on the fire. And I think kind of to your earlier point about like going out and then that fear of the anti-Asian discrimination, I think for me personally, there's two things. Is one, I am concerned for my family because obviously I am not around them. I'm states away, and God knows what happens over there and whatnot. And then the second part is like,
Your family in Texas.
yeah,
what you
sorry,
mean.
my family in
Okay.
Texas.
Yeah.
And then the other part is like, I'd be lying if, kind of again to your other point, if I didn't say that I definitely anglicize my outfits a little bit. I put on a little bit of extra denim just in case, and make sure that I try to not draw too much attention to myself. All right, so the next question, again, kind of to an earlier talking point that we had, all three of us put ourselves out into a little bit more of a visible space than I think the average person does. We get a little bit more of a spotlight put on us, and as a result, do you have people who, kind of a reversal of rules from an earlier talking point, who are excited because you are Korean in your case, or for me and Winan, Vietnamese?
It's interesting. I'm so conflicted about this. I wish my face wasn't online, but because of tournaments, it automatically was. So I figured I may as well use it on stream because I think it makes streams better. Or I can do things on stream that I wouldn't be able to with cam. And so that opens up a door of possibilities, the negative stuff we've been talking about, but also the positive. So I've had a bunch where I share stories that may or may not even have anything to do with Asian American experience, but every single time I post a commentary, I get at least one comment that's like, oh man, I'm also Korean, I'm also Asian, I'm also Vietnamese, whatever it is. It doesn't even need to be a positive message, but it's like maybe that person, this is the first time they're ever interacting with someone that's presenting as a normal human being and not a caricature. I don't know if I said that word correctly. And it's kind of a cool feeling. It makes me feel like if I can be what Ryan Higa was to me for someone else, then it's kind of all worth it. All the negativity is worth it.
Winan, I want to hear about your experiences with somebody, I guess, either asking, are you Vietnamese? And then what do they do when they find out?
Yeah, I feel similar to what Egg has been saying. So, I guess like growing I guess let me tell this little quick story about growing up and being in middle school or high school and finding someone that not only is Asian but like the same Asian as you. That sounds really weird, but like
yeah,
I'm Vietnamese, and growing up and being in middle school and being in high school, and I did live in Houston, Texas, so it's not like there was a shortage of Asian Americans, but finding someone that was like the same race as you, like, oh, you're Vietnamese American too, so you know what I'm going through, or these different
it's deeper
values. Like it was really nice to find someone that I could culturally relate to. It was just really fun to just have someone to share that with. And then now that I am older and I'm definitely more out there as far as like being on the internet and stuff, or even being on stage. When I was an actor before I joined BMG, I was a local actress in Austin, Texas. And what was just really great to see is just having people be also excited to find that connection, like the connection that I found when I was younger, seeing other people find that connection and being like, oh my gosh, you represent me. So like, I guess another little anecdote is like when I was an actress, I did a lot of theater for young audiences, so children's theater. And it was really, really exciting to see when I would be on stage doing the thing, and then when the show is over, seeing in the audience how many like Asian American families or Asian families being out in the audience and having their little girl or little boy be so excited to like meet me, like the character, and that I look like them. I feel like that's really important, especially for like children's at young ages. So that was also just really exciting to see like their eyes light up because there is someone that they recognize in a sense on stage that they're seeing. And then as far as like the internet goes and like being on dev streams and stuff, yeah, I know you and I talk about this all the time. There's people who DM us or whisper us or whatever saying like, hey, are you Vietnamese? Oh my gosh, you're the same race as me. This is so exciting. And like, as much as I want to answer every single, DM, I don't get a chance to, but I like to know that I am shining this connection with other folks who are just trying to find that cultural connection as well. Sometimes it can be a bit much, but I still appreciate that I get to be some sort of like example or representation that they're seeking. Because I know when I was younger, I was seeking it.
Yeah.
I get a couple things from that, or I take a couple things away from that. The first thing, which is kind of sad, is that why is it that a 6-year-old kid needs to go to a local theater and see a Vietnamese American perform on stage to feel recognized? Like, why do they need that? Like, it's great that they can get that. It's fantastic. But, like, why do they need that? Because they don't get it anywhere else.
Question. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
And
such a good question.
So the flip side of it, which I think it's it's an incredibly empowering feeling to know that you can give someone some sense of themselves just by existing, by performing whatever it is. But does that also feel like a burden? Do you feel the need to always present a positive
egg.
image? What?
That was a question. You're leaking. You're getting ahead.
I'm just too big brain. I should be running the show.
I feel like now we should talk about a little bit is like that sense of duty, that sense of responsibility
Yeah.
as a representative, either for your culture specific, like your ethnicity, or in the broader sense of like being an Asian American. I'll let either of you, I guess, Winan, do you want to go first?
Sure. I don't think burden is the word I would use. I definitely feel like there can be some pressure as to holding this representation and making sure like I am a shining light or something, but like I wouldn't say it's a burden. It's definitely like a responsibility that I am aware of and that I am wholly down to like, represent and uphold. Is it a responsibility that I asked for? No, but it's something that I understand is important because, like I said, growing up, I was always seeking representation in some shape or form. And, after performing, children's theater, I literally would see it in the eyes of these children. Like they're just trying to find representation themselves. And it's just like, I understand that feeling. And so because I understand that feeling, I'm more open to being like, yeah, I'm gonna do my best to try to like be that representation that people are seeking.
Yeah, I feel that a little bit as well. I'm very conflicted. I mean, I overthink literally everything, so this may be an extremely long-winded way of answering the question, but... So it depends which variable we're talking, right? I talk a lot about mental health, and so on that variable, I feel absolutely no pressure to present a level of happiness or a level of excitement or a level of stability or maturity, because I recognize that if someone is in the same place that I am and they see me being weak, then they don't feel as weak. And so I feel no pressure to perform when that's the variable we're talking. When we're talking about things that are not necessarily in my control, that are, I think, more broadly judged, it gets complicated because one part of me wants to be an idealist and say, let me just be me? Why should it matter what other people think? Why should it matter if someone draws a negative thing and applies it to other people from what I do? I just want to be me. Why does that have to stop me from doing what I want to do? Then the realist comes in and says, yeah, no, I wish that could be the case. Unfortunately, it's not. You can't just ignore it. You can choose to not follow it, but that has to be a choice because you have to recognize that it's there in order to actually make an educated decision about what you want to do. So like, I do feel a deep level of pressure sometimes to represent myself in the best way so that people don't judge other people, but it's never because I'm okay being weak. I think that's why I brought up the example of mental health. It's like, it's fine if it's just me. If people think I'm a loser, that's totally fine. They can think I'm a loser. But if they think my family is a loser and has done a terrible job bringing me up, and they like are disrespectful towards them because of how I act, like I feel like that's on me, and that's a level of pressure that it just builds up sometimes.
I feel like a dumbass because because I'll be completely honest, it's not a thought for me. I just go about and my goal is to represent myself as best as possible, be nice to people, be kind to people. I kind of accept the fact that ultimately someone's going to look at me and they're going to have a thought and I don't control that. I just do me and they're going to think them and it's going to be one way or the other. For everyone who has a negative thought about me for my race, there's going to be someone who has a positive thought about me for my race. So I try not to overthink about that and I just go about living my life and I guess that's why I feel terrible because I know there's a level of empathy involved with like being like, yeah, I do have a responsibility.
I think you're deeply selling yourself short here, actually. Because I think what you're describing is what I was describing on the other end, like about making a choice. I think you have the ability from whatever level of self-confidence, self-security to make that choice to say, I'm gonna do me, I'm gonna present. Like, okay, but this is why it's even more impressive, is because you don't think it's impressive. For me, I overthink everything. And so that's constantly a thought in my mind of grappling, who am I, right? Other people's opinions of me, a stranger who has never interacted with me, who I will never see ever in my entire life, who probably didn't even think about what they said, their word, their opinion about who I am is as powerful, sometimes even more powerful than my own thoughts about myself. For you, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. It seems like you have a great grasp, a great amount of security in who you are, and that gives you the power to say, yeah, people are going to have bad thoughts about me. I'm not going to be able to control that. They can think whatever they want to think. I know who I am. I'm totally not there yet, and that's why I'm so conflicted. But it seems like you, whether you have realized it or not, have moved past that step and are kind of at a seemingly pretty healthy place.
You know, I think it comes with being 70 years older than you. But also, I think I would also be lying if I said that I didn't sometimes have these thoughts. I guess
right, yeah,
it wasn't
it's
like
ups and downs.
Yeah, I think prior to like this, I'll go way back in the history books, like back in 1940s when I was in high school. I definitely took steps to anglicize myself. I would specifically not wear hats because I thought I looked too Asian with a hat on, you know. So I definitely think I had those periods in time where I made extra steps to again kind of like not draw attention to myself or my Asianness. But I've definitely moved past that in the millions of years.
I think it's a really cool position to be in because you're able to sympathize or empathize with people that are in the middle of that stage. Getting different snapshots of different stages and how people think about things is really valuable because it shows that, you know, oftentimes when people look at those who are experienced and those who are experts in a field, then you think to yourself, I can never get there. But when you realize that people have always been at a certain step of the way, I think it really opens the door for kind of acceptance of where you're at. So like, it seems like we're all kind of in different places of that same thing, which is really cool.
I have honestly about 2 more questions. So one of the questions I have is just kind of how do you think, well, I guess yours is slightly different, but how do you think the Asianness that you have has really impacted you, maybe the opportunities? I've definitely had experiences where somebody has been, hey, you're Asian, can you help me with this math stuff? Like those different kinds of situations. And I'm just curious how it's kind of impacted you. Are there some that really stood out?
We can talk about the bad stuff first and end it on a good note, but you know, catcalling and oh, Asian women are more submissive and men like that. I'm like, no, what? Like, you know, like, what? I don't know you. Get away from me. Like, you know, like just stuff like that. So there's weird stuff there. So that's been a negative thing. It's weird. It's a weird subject to like bounce off of. It's like, thank you for thinking I'm so good at math. Let's just say that. Like, that's the subject. But also like, why do you think I'm so good at math? Is it because I'm Asian? And then as far as like positive stuff, I feel like this is my own personal like life journey. I feel like I've gotten a lot of opportunities because I was Asian, because I was, in a sense, different. I can talk about how like when I was applying to colleges and because I was looking to be a theater major, that is a very like unique, distinctive, whoa, yes, we want you in our program for diversity purposes, you know, like
gotta fill that quota.
Okay. It sucks to like think about that, like, oh, you have a quota you have to fill up. But I cannot deny it did lead me to many opportunities. Same thing happened when I was like a local actress in Austin, Texas. It was so unique when I would go audition and I would be auditioning for Shakespeare or whatever, you know, 12th Night, whatever, or just any play. And it's just like, I am an Asian American and I could be your lead. People would be like, whoa, you know? It's like a double-edged knife because it's like, yes, it's really unique. We want diversity. We are open to diversity, but also it's maybe some theater companies or groups or films or whatever are like, we're looking more to typecast you as this and not that. I saw it more in film when my agent would send me out to like commercials and film auditions. It's just, they put you in this little category, like
Yeah.
you're Asian, so you're gonna stay here. And it's like, no, I could be.
I think
someone else.
you've seen it more directly than I have, but I also want to know what people's experience.
Yeah, that's just my personal experience. There's some good and there's some bad.
I guess like the thesis or like the underlying thing that I'm hearing is that oftentimes there are moments where being a minority gives opportunity that may not otherwise be there. But the thing is that something that I personally do not have to think about often is this conflict between, do I get this because of me, or am I getting this because of something that someone else has decided for me from something that I can't control? And that type of conflict is something that I have never really had to think about in this respect. Like, I've never had to wonder, am I getting into this school because I'm part Asian or because I'm not part Asian? And like, even if you get into the school because you're Asian, whatever that means, you have to think about something that someone that isn't in that position just doesn't have to. It's an extra step, an extra layer of that mental baggage. And I think sharing these types of stories is really awesome because it shows someone that may not have had that experience, like, oh, yeah, people get really mad when minorities get into college or whatever for diversity requirements, but it's not like it's a home advantage. It's like you're still fighting within the system that's designed to make you feel like you're othered. And then a thought that I have whenever things like this come up, especially in regards to positive stereotypes, like, oh, you're good at math, you know, oh, you're really smart.
Are those positive stereotypes?
I mean, positive in the sense that it's like a positive characteristic, but there's always a flip side to it, right? Any stereotype will always come with the erasure of the individual. When someone fits into that stereotype, because often it is based in some kind of truth, and people use that as ammo to justify it, which is hopefully the opposite of what I'm getting across. When someone's a star student, and they're great at math, and they're great at science, and they say, oh, okay, it's because you're Asian. Like, what does that do to someone? What is that actually saying? And like, what is that person having to experience to fit into that stereotype? Like, everyone always talks about, oh, you got straight A's, you must feel so smart. Half of the people that are ranked number 1, 2, 3 in their class feel like they're the stupidest people in the room. And why is that? When everything you do is in pursuit of proving yourself for some external accomplishment, for getting the best grades, to get into the best college, to get the best job, there's nothing left that's you. Your entire identity is defined by everything that you've achieved. And if you achieve a bad grade, if you get an F, it's not like you got an F, it's you are an F, you're a failure. And so like, nobody talks about what happens to the people that their entire lives they've been told that their value is not what they are, but what they've done. And it's like, okay, maybe I'm good at math, which I'm not, I'm terrible at math. But it's like, maybe someone respects me, quote unquote, because I'm good at math and because I'm Asian. But like, what are you respecting? You're not respecting me, you're respecting the accomplishments, you're respecting what I've done. And even when there are positive experiences that come from it, there's always the flip side, the other side of the coin, which is that you're ignoring a huge part of the person that has had to do something came at a cost of getting to that point. And that's always really tragic. It's always really sad. Because that person who has always been told that that their value comes from their external things, what happens when they fail?
Dude, it's devastating.
The world is over.
Right now,
I'm also describing me, but like, what's easier, right? When you win 2 matches in Brawlhalla and then lose, or when you win 699 matches and lose the 700th? It's like, every time you succeed, the failure that's looming over you gets harder and harder. And you would think that someone who's rank 1 in their school and like has the best grades and is like very popular and everything is extremely happy about that and feels great about their accomplishments. No, they feel helpless. It's like, what's next? The bar will always increase. Because you're fighting on a plane that has no winner. You will never be the best at something unless you're the best at something. Only one person in the entire world can be the best. And yet you have millions of people that are told that they need to be. And so they will never be good enough because they're fighting a battle that they just can't win.
It sucks. It does suck. It's so deep because I resonate with it so much. Like, a lot of the stuff you said really does resonate with me because I definitely had a very stereotypical Asian upbringing.
Yeah.
That if I got anything lower than an A, I am a failure. I mean, I like straight up am a failure.
I got lucky, I want to say. I have 2 older siblings, and both of them had all that pressure put on them. By the time my parents got to me, they're like, I'm happy if you're happy. And that was what they would tell me. And so I would be like, all right, I'll go for good grades because I know that it's important. But my whole identity wasn't revolving around getting the best grades or anything like that. Instead, I was able to kind of forge my own identity, and they would be very supportive of the fact, like, you know, middle school, high school, I would be like, you know what, I don't know what I want to do in life, so let me just take a bunch of different electives and just see. Let me take a culinary class, and as long as I was doing my best in that class, then my parents were still supportive. So I didn't have that extra pressure, and I think that also helped me because then it helped push me away from, again, kind of to bring it back to the original just Asian identity topic, is like I wasn't in that position of trying to be the number one Asian. Instead, I was like, someone else is gonna do that. I'm just gonna try to find what I want to do in life and find where I want to go. And I was very fortunate in that regard.
You know, I have one older brother. We were only a year apart. I got the benefits of being like a younger child, but also the pressure of still doing good. Like I had both the mixture. So obviously it was mostly my father who was really hard on my brother and I. Mostly my brother, but also me too. Like I still got a lot of it as well. But because I was like the younger child, I had more leeway into exploring things like the arts, for example, right? Because unfortunately that is frowned upon in like
Oh,
very
for sure.
strict
Yeah.
traditional.
You're not a doctor,
Yeah.
you're not a lawyer, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah, exactly. Like very traditional, strict Asian culture. That was like drilled in. And so, you know, of course, when I brought up the idea of wanting to explore the arts, you know, there were plenty of conversations there. But in the end, I still was like, you can stop me, but I'm going to do it. And then I got to be able to do it. But I feel like if my brother tried anything like that, it would have been so disastrous.
So I guess kind of there's two different directions I want to talk about, but one to the immediate is again, to your point, you and your brother are a year apart. Me and my brother are 7 years apart.
That's true.
My sister is 4 years older than me. There was a lot of different times where they got to learn from them. My brother, I love him. He made mistakes. He is a human, and of course, because he was the first, there's a lot of this pressure, and because he made those mistakes, my parents tried what they thought was right, which is they put extra pressure on him to succeed, and they saw the results of that. And they tried the same thing with my sister, and they saw the results. So there was a lot of more time to learn in between. And by the time they got to me, I still had those same kind of conversations where they pushed me to go into computer science. They pushed me to go into electrical engineering. And then midway through it, I told them, like, I told them, hey, this is making me miserable. I am not going to be happy doing this. I know it'll be the financial decision, but ultimately I am not going to be happy. But like, I had to be very upfront about how serious it was to me. And I was like, I'm going to go do this thing that I think I'm going to very much enjoy. And I know that I had to prove to them, like, as part of it though, is like, I had to prove to them, hey, I know I'm going to do this thing. It's something that y'all have no experience with. And so y'all won't be able to be there to help hold my hand, but I know what directions I can go with it. I know where I can take this. And if things go bad, you know, I know you'll still be there because you're my parents and y'all care about me. And that's effectively what happened. But that, like, all of that had to be unpacked in and explored, and it was something that they had 7 years of growth between my brother and I to kind of learn.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you had this desire and this self-awareness that, like, I can't fill this figure that you think I might be and you want me to be. I'm going to push myself to do my own thing, and I recognize that you're looking out for me and you want what's best for me, but I'm going to try this. And I know you may feel guilty or may feel bad that you won't be able to help me, but I believe in myself and I know that you'll still be there for me. And I think that is connects even more to what we were talking about earlier about that level of maybe confidence isn't the right word, but I think what often happens in these kinds of situations, and maybe I'll use this time, I guess, a little bit to explain to those who may not be super familiar with Asian American families, because often there's that stereotype tiger mom, tiger parents. You always got to do what you have to do for your parents. A lot of time people have this assumption that people who grow up like that hate their parents, and that it's like, yeah, my mom always forces me to stay at home and study for 5 hours. And then often what happens is the kids, it's not that they hate their parents. In fact, they love their parents so much that they sacrifice their own well-being in order to protect and fit what their parents want for them, because that will make them happier. And so that's why it's so hard for people that have grown up like that to just do what they want to do. People in America often think, oh yeah, it's individualist. You do you know? Do what you gotta do it for yourself, love yourself. But there's a level of family ties and responsibility that is very, very deeply ingrained in Asian culture that makes it very difficult to do things like that. So when someone shares a story where they're really struggling about being able to break out of this protective shell that their parents have set up for them, remember that it's not just about them, it's about their ties to everyone else. So I think Duke's story is really great at kind of breaking that a little bit.
It definitely was. It's a story that comes with the lens of me looking back, because I know personally when I was in that role, when I was there, I could only see the pressure. I couldn't see the reason behind it. I recognize, like, now that I'm a lot older and, you know, thinking about, like, if I had a kid, yeah, I would put pressure on them, but it comes from a good place. It doesn't come from a place of just, I want to have my kid be stressed out of his mind all the time trying to get hundreds on all of his tests. No, it's because I want them to have the best chance at succeeding in life.
Yeah, I want them to do what I couldn't do. I want them to live a life that's full and that's complete. And oftentimes it comes from a time period where that is the truth. That is the only way for an Asian to succeed. Nowadays, it's a lot different. So sometimes there's like a time gap there. But yeah,
So my final question is, do you have maybe more affinity towards quote unquote your type of Asian, or do you just kind of like, hey, Asian succeeding, let's go?
I feel like when I was growing up, maybe I felt very proud of being a Vietnamese American or a Vietnamese Asian, whatever. And I don't think I harbor any like bad blood or anything.
You don't
like
have the
that.
history of
But
wars,
I was just like, yeah, Vietnamese people, rock on. We're amazing.
I have a question.
But now I'm like, nah, all Asians. You succeeding? Hell yeah. Lit.
Did you have North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese disparity? You know, Winan, that if we went out and we ate pho and we tried it, you could kind of tell, okay, this was likely made by a South Vietnamese family. This was likely made by a North Vietnamese family. You know, there's like those differences.
Yeah, different like dialects and regions, right? For me, no, never have I ever, growing up or now, was I like, oh my God, you're a North Vietnamese? Real talk, 1975, hard time. Hard time for my family, both my mom and dad's side, trying to come over to America. I know you had your own personal stories about your mom and dad also trying to come over. 1975, hard times. If anything, ever since growing up in America, it's just been like, you're Vietnamese, cool. Doesn't matter if you're north, south, or middle, right? Those are like the different regions. Didn't matter. We just united that we were Vietnamese. Yeah. If we were different from different regions and we had different dialects, didn't matter to us. At least to me. This is my personal experience. Like, I never was like, oh my gosh, you're from a different region. Yikes. You know, like, never was like that.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but when I see Kim Jong-un developing nuclear weapons, I'm like, hell yeah. That's my guy right there.
That's my type of
No. Twitch, that was a joke. Twitch!
TOS.
No, I noticed that a lot. I mean, this often goes so overlooked because in America, not in Asia, but in America, inner Asian racism goes so overlooked, but it's so rampant and it is so deeply ingrained. Like, especially against Japan, because Japan has a big imperial history of taking over other countries, colonizing, and trying to convert them into Japanese. So like, a lot of people in Korea just hate Japanese people a lot. There's a lot of dark-skinned Asians get so much racism thrown at them from lighter-skinned Asians. In East Asia, having pale skin is like the most desirable thing possible. So there's like a lot of it. But I think when you come to America, I think it's a lot less, because it's like, all right, we all made it. We're here. We're all going through this thing, and it's bad for everyone. So we made it. Interestingly enough, basically a lot of Asian American immigration to the US was a replacement for slavery after the Civil War. It was effectively slavery from China instead of from Africa. But when they brought over Japanese immigrants and Korean immigrants onto the same plantations, there was so much like inner conflict that they basically had to completely separate the groups into different areas, and they tiered them based on their Asian ethnicity, which is absolutely insane. But there is a deep history even in America of that interracial hate, even among the big umbrella of Asian, which I find pretty interesting.
I definitely see both, a couple of the things that you pointed out, which is like that in America, especially like I think from an external point of view, I think a lot of people will just be like, "You're all Asian. Why are y'all fighting?" kind of thing. And then also you talked a little bit about how those specific traits that are specifically East Asian, I've definitely noticed that as well, where it's like I have been referred to as a jungle Asian because that is what Southeast Asian in our heritage, and it's like there is a little bit of like a derogatoriness to it.
Yeah, it's really tragic
Yeah.
too. Like, I think in Southeast Asia especially, there's so much body dysmorphia because of the popularity of like Korean models, K-pop, J-pop, everything like that. What you aspire to be is this, you know, pale skin, super skinny, whatever, and so they look at themselves and like, oh, I'm not good enough. But I find it really fascinating when people think like, oh yeah, American racism, inter-Asians, why are you guys fighting? Like, America has been around for 300 years. You know how long China's been around? Like, it's been happening for thousands of years. You're just only learning about it now.
I do find that is really interesting because, like I said, like as a first generation Asian American, I personally didn't experience those things, but it's not like now that you bring it up, it's not like I never heard that. When I was young and, you know, we're hanging out with like our extended family, it's not like I've never heard like, oh, you want to make sure that you grow up to be pale skin and you want to look like, you know, like,
Yeah.
and it's like, what? Like, now that you bring that up, that like did trigger some memories of like having extended family members talk about like me when I was a little baby, like, oh wow, you're so beautiful because your skin is pale, or like your eyes are more almond, or, you know, like, like
Your eyes are wider.
stuff like that. And you're
Yeah.
like, what? I feel like once I, you know, just started growing up and being more self-aware, I just paid attention to like what was happening immediately around me as far as like the friends I was hanging out with, and like I didn't experience that really. And if I did, I was like, stop this shit. Like, what are you? We're all here. Like, you know, it's like, yeah, all of our families made it. We're here in America. Let's at least stand together, you know?
I don't have any more questions. I can either close out here, or if you wanna, if any of y'all have had a thought that you're like, hey, we had this conversation about this thing, I remembered something else I wanted to bring up, or I have a new question because we've, you know, triggered some thoughts. Do y'all I'll open the floor?
On the topic of Brawlhalla, Brawlhalla has a bunch of characters from different cultures around the world and around time, which I find pretty interesting, and I'm curious about the different Asian characters, if that gives you any semblance of like, oh, that's kind of cool. Because for me personally, I look at them and I say, oh yeah, Queen Eye sucks. I don't think about like, you know, oh, her culture. You know?
I feel like Winan has the most that she could say with regards to this. You, more than anyone I know, has experienced, oh, Lin Fei, they modeled Lin Fei after, oh, that's why Lin Fei is in the game, because, you know, like, you've had to deal with that, and which I have no one said, hey, look, he looks like Jae Yun. Although when I started top nodding, people said I look like Koji.
What's funny is that when you and I joined BMG, they, I think, were starting to work on Lin Fei, and that was my first taste of like being a producer and helping with the creation of a new legend and stuff. And I remember helping out with naming her. I think I was the one who put out Lin Fei or something like that. But besides that, after Lin Fei was released, and then I started showing myself more on dev streams and whatnot, right? It did take me a little aback when people were like, oh my god, you look just like Lin Fei. It's like, thank you. Like, I didn't know how to take that. It's like, okay, cool. If BMG did model me after a legend, that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. But they didn't do that though.
Other way around.
I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Other way around. But you know what I mean, right? It's like, okay, that's a nice thought. If like you think I look like this legend that is in a video game, like that's pretty cool. But like I'm not, and that's not what we were intending. So I don't. It's a weird, awkward line again. It's like that conversation.
Yeah.
Of like,
for me, it circles back to that initial conversation of like you're not Chinese,
Yeah.
right? So when someone says you look like Lin Fei, I think it's kind of a reductionist kind of statement to be like, oh, you're Asian. That's an Asian female.
yeah,
Bing bang boom equals sign.
that's the awkward
That's
part.
what I think I take issue with.
It's definitely awkward for sure. It's definitely awkward. But I try to see it as like, oh, these people are just really excited that I might look like a character in a game. That's a pretty cool idea.
I think it's when they take that extra step. I assume personally that most of it is innocent at
It's
first.
innocent. Yeah.
It's like I don't think
I
there's an
tried.
ill intent as much as it's just like that was the thought that went into their head and they had to get it out. But yeah, if they take that extra step, they're like, oh, you look like Lin Fei. They must have made her because you got hired or something like that. Then I start to take issue, I think.
It's just it's weird. So like when it's a celebrity or if it's a legend in Brawlhalla, it's still like that same feeling of like, thank you, but why are you making that comment? Because I don't know how to take it, right? Like, are you trying to compliment me because I look like this cool character in a game, or are you just kind of being innocently racist? It's like I don't.
On that note, though, I think I'm gonna call it there. I want to thank both of you for coming out, having this conversation, because it is a conversation that it's very interesting to me, and it's maybe one that I'll want to explore again at another point. But for now, I think I'm gonna leave it there. If y'all want to say any parting words or shout out to yourself or your socials or anything, now's your opportunity.
Well, I have a Twitter and Instagram, just White Sheepy, and you can see me on Death Streams on Tuesdays.
I'm Egg, and bye.